The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Charlotte Salwai Tabimasmas, Prime Minister of the Republic of Vanuatu. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Monsieur le Président, Excellence, Chef d'État.
President, Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I have the great honour to address this eminent assembly on behalf of the government and of the people of the Republic of Vanuatu. Mr. President, I join previous speakers in extending my sincere congratulations to you upon your election as President of the 79th session of the General Assembly. You can count on my delegation's full support and cooperation as you steer the work of this august assembly. I commend your predecessor and I welcome the theme of this session, leaving nobody behind, acting together for the advancement of peace, sustainable development and human dignity for present and future generations, because it addresses the global challenges of our time. Mr. President, 79 years after the creation of the United Nations, our efforts to create a better world for current and future generations are quite simply disappointing. It is alarming that after all these years, we continue to be plagued by multiple world crises, undermining the promise of the Charter of the United Nations and failing our peoples, the most vulnerable in particular. Vanuatu welcomes the latest UN Secretary-General's report, which highlights the fact that we are significantly falling short of our objectives to achieve the SDGs, prompting the need to fast-track actions to scale up the implementation of the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. We risk crossing a dangerous temperature threshold over the next 10 years, and that's why Vanuatu requested an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice to give some clarity on the legal obligations of states when it comes to climate change. This is an initiative that was subject to unprecedented global attention. The opinion received by the court as part of this procedure is in our consensus-based resolution of last year, providing legal clarity on the obligations and responsibility of states when it comes to the climate. This doesn't seek to blame or stigmatize any particular country, but rather it seeks to shed light on existing international rules and regulations and the obligations of all states when it comes to creating a solid basis for concrete climate action and for climate justice based on shared responsibility and accountability. I launch an appeal to all of the members of the United Nations, especially other climate vulnerable nations, to participate in these historic hearings which begin on the 2nd of December 2024. Your voices are crucial in ensuring that the court fully grasps the implications of climate change for the most affected, and will unite us in our shared commitment to justice and human rights as part of a more sustainable future. Mr. President, Vanuatu's economy fared well when we maintained our status as a least developing country. When we graduated, our structural challenges and vulnerabilities remained, while increasing costs continue to soar. We reiterate the need for our development partners to support us in phasing out our LDC-specific support in a gradual and predictable manner. Small island economies also continue to face multiple crises amid tightening financial conditions and rising borrowing costs. This has increased our debt distress risk and undermined our ability to invest in our recoveries. Vanuatu welcomes the outcome of the Summit of the Future, calling for global, concerted efforts to reform the global economic and financial architecture to make it fit for the challenges of this century. We call for sweeping reforms of the Bretton Woods institutions to restructure the international monetary and financial system in order to better reflect the evolving global realities and challenges, including the establishment of an international sovereign debt workout mechanism to solve current debt crises in developing countries, particularly in the most vulnerable. Vanuatu and other small island economies are struggling with the onslaught of climate-induced disasters. And while we continue to try to build resilience and adapt to climate change, we are moving backwards too often. Vanuatu loses over half of its GDP every time a severe cyclone strikes. We have had 5 severe cyclones in the past 3 years. The latest Adaptation Fund report estimates that a current adaptation finance gap of between $194 and $366 billion a year. As a country in the front line of frequent and intensifying climate disasters, Vanuatu calls for a new finance goal that will accelerate the transition away from fossil fuels, build resilience, and realistically address loss and damage. In light of these initiatives to mitigate and adapt to climate change, Vanuatu also believes it is of crucial importance to prevent the severest harms to our planet's vital and climate-regulating ecosystems before they occur. It is for this reason that we have taken the formal step of proposing an independent crime of ecocide to the International Criminal Court. We thank delegations for their existing support, in particular Fiji and Samoa for their co-sponsorship of the proposal, and we recognise that there is broad and growing support for this initiative around the world. Mr. President, Vanuatu and many Pacific Island states have faced multiple correspondent banking withdrawals restricting financial inflows, including delay in the transfer of international development funds and humanitarian and disaster relief funds, as well as discouraging private sector investment. This is despite genuine efforts to improve and enforce national money laundering and finance for terrorism regulations. Safeguarding uninterrupted access to international financial services is essential for fast cross-border payments, including remittances and export revenues. We welcome the efforts made by the World Bank to help Pacific Island countries address this issue, among others, earlier this month. Mr. President, in 2019, Vanuatu presented its first Voluntary National Review, VNR, highlighting a very positive message of progress despite extreme vulnerability to climate-related disasters. The presentation of the second Voluntary National Review this year at the High-Level Political Forum highlighted significant challenges in our pursuit to achieve sustainable development. We continue to endure increasingly frequent and severe tropical cyclones, which were compounded by the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, and there is no clear trajectory or end in sight. Ever looming is the prospect of future disasters. The government and people of Vanuatu have had to continuously adapt and strengthen resilience mechanisms to mitigate the impacts of these persistent threats and disruptions. Mr. President, fulfilling the SDGs is not merely an aspiration, but rather a necessity for us. The 2023 SDG Summit saw the adoption of a strong political declaration and launched a new phase of accelerated action to achieve the SDGs by 2030. In July this year, the convening of the High-Level Political Forum, yet again, serves as a platform to follow up and review the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development with an aim to galvanise real transformational change to achieve these Sustainable Development Goals. More so, the recent convening of the Summit for the Future aims to rally collective support to deliver faster and smarter on the 2030 Agenda, the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, and the Paris Agreement on climate change. It is my hope that the reforms highlighted in the Pact for the Future will enable us to rebuild trust again in the multilateral system. The Pact for the Future requires strong political will to drive transformative actions that will usher in a brighter future for all. Mr. President, financing is the fuel for development. Yet, at the very heart of our lack of making real progress in achieving the SDGs lies a lack of financing. We remain at the front lines of a climate emergency that not only threatens our overall sustainable development, but time and again, given the lack of affordable alternatives, we are forced to incur unsustainable levels of debt to finance recovery from natural disasters. The international financial architecture, therefore, must be reformed to address the urgent challenges of today. Our varying needs must be embedded into the global economic and financial system so that it is more inclusive, fair, and responsive to all. This includes developing tailored support and solutions that also facilitate easier access to affordable long-term finance and address the decline in corresponding banking relations. Likewise, there must be a stronger push to enhance the representation and meaning participation of SIDS in the global economic and financial institutions. Mr. President, Vanuatu, like many of our Pacific neighbours, continues to face acute existential health and development threats, including the burden of non-communicable diseases and malnutrition, as well as threats from future pandemics. COVID-19 and severe tropical cyclones expose Vanuatu to its fragile health infrastructure and the need to invest in a health system that can better respond to the needs of its people and to future pandemics, that will be resilient to climate change and related natural disasters. We urge the World Health Organization and SIDS partners to work together to enhance access to sustainable financing to support our efforts to prevent and to control non-communicable diseases and our efforts to build a health system that is fit for purpose. Mr. President, advancing the agenda of leaving no one behind in the context of the non-self-governing territories means that we must work constructively to complete the work of decolonisation. Recently, the First Peoples of New Caledonia were not content with the manner in which the third referendum for political independence from France was conducted. As a result, riots took place, which led to several deaths and stalling of economic activity. It's essential to recognise the rights of First Peoples to their lands, oceans and culture. I encourage the First People of New Caledonia to work together with France to address their political future. In the meantime, New Caledonia must remain in the decolonisation list. In a similar vein, we call for the right of the First People in West Papua over their customary land and culture to be respected, and I plead that they work mutually with the government of Indonesia to address their challenges and to obtain greater autonomy for West Papua for greater participation in decision-making. Mr. President, to achieve sustainable development, we need peace. Today, some regions of the world are not able to enjoy sustainable development due to the inability of the United Nations to maintain international peace and security. We call for the urgent reform of the UN Security Council to ensure that it is fit for purpose and able to meet the challenges of our time. We are deeply concerned over the greatest threat to international peace and security posed by the continued existence of nuclear weapons. With the current heightened global geopolitical tensions, we call for a renewed and strengthened effort to come out of the current impasse in achieving nuclear disarmament and nuclear non-proliferation in all of its aspects. We further call for the United Nations Charter to be respected. In today's fractured and polarised world, we need to accelerate our efforts to work together and rebuild trust in the multilateral system. The UN at its centre. The Summit of the Future offers us hope, and now we need to move from rhetoric to real actions on the ground. We need peace for the advancement of sustainable development and human dignity for present and future generations. It's essential to act on finance as a driving force for development. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of the Republic of Vanuatu.